I've had the pleasure of meeting many of you already, but if I haven't, I'd like to welcome you to Capital Community College virtually. We've been having a lot of these meetings over the course of the last year. As a matter of fact, March 12th last year, we shut down our campus. And, I was just talking as we're coming into session about, the year that we've had. There were elements of it certainly that we're glad are behind us. But at the same time, there have been a number of COVID gifts. And I'd imagine that our ability to move our institution forward the way we are this morning, with people from throughout the state and the nation around this topic of support of our students and collective action, wouldn't have happened probably post COVID, right? Or certainly in this format. So with today, what we're going to do is I'll set the stage with a few brief slides, and then we'll go into our keynote speakers, who will be introduced by Carl Guerrieri, who is our director of our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Center. And then the highlight of the afternoon, or the morning, I would suggest, is the ability for us to talk with one another about what we feel we could do even better as it relates to our collective collective action around and building a better quilt and creating our services together and supports and missions together in support of the people that we care about in our community. And that's how we want to wrap up the day. And so with that, let me share a few slides. Okay, and the people that have worked with me, you may not have noticed just now, but they were holding their breath because it's been an adventure all year with Dr. Harris and his technology challenges. And so do you see the first screen there, Carl? You can give me the heads up. He's my AV. Carl used to wheel the AV cart around in elementary school when they had the AV assistant. So he'd get out of class and he'd wheel the projector or LCD projector around. So thank you, Carl. So we're here today, and Capital collaborates. I think that the action verb in that says it all, and we're very desirous of having more effective collaborations with our stakeholders, right? And so that's at the heart of this, and we're excited about. And thank you in advance for joining us and putting your thinking caps on how we could do that even better. More and better has been a theme for me for the year. So, Hartford and its community college. We are Hartford's community college. We've been here since 1962, and we're a merger of two campuses, our technical school, and we had a community college for quite some time. And Capital Community College moved downtown in 2002. As many of us are aware, when oftentimes people describe Hartford, I think that Dickens' tale of two cities is a fitting metaphor for many of the things that we encounter about our city. I'm not going to read that to you, but I think that is what many of us on this call or on this workshop are very uniquely aware of, right? And so this past year, we certainly we saw how some of the poverty and inequity that plagues our city was amplified in the midst of the two pandemics that occurred last year. But at the same time, it seems as though, and there's a huge upside, I'd suggest, for Hartford, right? As my students would say, Hartford's on the come up, right? And there's certainly this air of opportunity and prosperity. We're talking to our friends from Liberty Bank, who just launched, 2 new centers in the city, et cetera. And so there's investment, there's cranes in the air. We'll have baseball again in a few weeks. We'll have 17 graduation ceremonies at the Yard Goat Stadium in a few weeks. And so there is this air of opportunity and the potential for prosperity for many who have been denied access to that for quite some time. That's also at the heart of this morning's meeting. And I, like many, feel like the spring feels a little different. I actually had COVID last year. Many things happened to me. I think the impact of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd had a very profound impact on me in my view of myself in the world and responsibilities and obligations that I have. And so this spring, at 51 years old, it feels very different than any spring that I've had in the past. I'd imagine it maybe have a similar feeling for many of us here this morning. So with that, there's a short video that I want to show. Our mayor had a conflicting appointment this morning, and so but however, back in December, there was the Aspen Institute has been doing a study and produced a report called Building a Lifelong Learning System. And they looked at 3 cities. They looked at Hartford, they looked at Phoenix, and they looked at Chicago. And what they did also as a part of that study was they looked at the community colleges that exist in all of those students in all of those cities and the role that they play as a key cog in the economic engine and their work as anti-poverty institutions, which is a way in which Capital certainly has begun to view ourselves and our work. And so let me share a short clip from Mayor Bronin, who couldn't be here this morning. Okay. And
the pandemic is impacting low-income communities of color, and the Hartford demographic. Obviously, you're right in the crosshairs of the pandemic. Our report, one of the participants in our discussions was the community college that you have in Hartford, Capital Community College, and one of the innovative things that they've developed is an equity resource center to begin to address these challenges and look at the needs that people have, not just to be able to go to community college, but issues around housing, right, issues around affordability, transportation, and childcare. And so, obviously we saw in Hartford, as we did in Phoenix and Chicago, the importance of not just the education system, but all of the other kind of ancillary systems to education working at the same time. Obviously, those have all gotten more challenging, but in terms of trying to create equitable outcomes, the question I have for you is like, what work, can a city do to promote equity in terms of, workforce outcomes and access to some of these critical education and training opportunities that help people, who have been displaced by the pandemic or displaced by technology move into new jobs sure, that offer a career pathway for them?
So let me come at that question a little bit indirectly. Hartford is a small city. We have 2 universities, the University of Hartford and Trinity, that are outstanding educational institutions. For us, one of the challenges that many of the graduates of those schools don't stay in Hartford. And so a lot of the conversation about our community college was driven by the fact that for the Hartford community, for our residents, community college is often their only option or only perceived option for post-secondary education. And for us, it's also the educational institution that keeps more of our residents, or say whose graduates more often stay in the city of Hartford. But it's really important to highlight that even at our community college, the completion rate is stunningly and tragically low. We have so many Hartford residents who begin coursework at Capital Community College and never complete it. And so I think one of the things that we really can do and are trying to do is change the expectations and change culture around credentials other than a degree. Because for our residents who've got childcare challenges, who may have housing challenges, who may have difficulty balancing job and education, being able to come away from a semester with something that lasts and something that matters, rather than just making a little bit of progress towards a goal that ultimately they might have to take a detour from, is really, really important. And a part of that is working with our community college and other educational institutions to do that. A part of it is working with industry to make sure that those credentials are really designed for the jobs that are available. And a part of it is, I think, changing the the culture sometimes inside corporate HR departments, so that they're really looking at skills rather than at degrees. I think it's important to say, anytime we're talking about this, that none of this should be seen as in tension with or inconsistent with setting really high expectations for ourselves as a community and wanting to make sure that any kid going through our Hartford Public Schools who wants to go to a four-year college has the ability to do that. But we also know the reality that far too few of our residents are getting there right now. And we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help make sure that there are multiple pathways to the life that our residents want to build.
Yeah, well, let me pick up on.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I hope came through loud and clear in that is that that Mayor Bronin referred to the rates of completion at Capitol, and the reoccurring theme is it's not that our students aren't cognitively capable or motivated, et cetera, but it is those very real barriers: housing, childcare, the need or requirement to have to work to pay for living expenses and rent and things like that, that impede at a disproportionate rate our students' ability to complete their degrees and certificates, right? And so thus our equity center, thus the work of the college doubling down. So we know that our students are as smart as any students in the world. But once again, if a student has an issue around quality childcare, they would do what I would do as a parent of three, is put the needs of their child prior to completing a chemistry class. And so so there are things like that that we're really leaning into and taking on, and that's at the heart of this work. When you look at where our students live, and so this past fall, we were at, our head count was 2718. And actually this fall, that's down to about 2,300 students. Nationally, community colleges and urban centers had, and in particular on Black students, a higher rate of lack of retention. And the impact of COVID has disproportionately impacted urban community colleges and Black students in particular. And so our rates were 36% Black, and our numbers are down, and that mirrors trends nationally. But when you look at where our students live and some of the zip codes, and you can see in the yellow highlighted zip codes, those are some of the poor zip codes in the nation when you look at household median income in the nation. And so depending on the index that you're looking at, Hartford, perhaps has been cited as the fourth or fifth poorest city in the nation. And so, thus, our ability to ensure that students have access to careers and degrees, and moving from a median household income of $25,000 to $60,000 after completing our nursing degree, we, fervently understand the impact of that and the importance of that work. And so we'll be talking a lot about that today. This is one of my favorite slides. I'm not sure if our friends from CWP, our Capital Workforce Partners, the Regional Workforce Investment Board, are on. I know that some of our fellow board members are on here today, and Stephen and some of the other folks. But when we look at the demand, and so we have employers on here, and there's a goal of 70% of all adults having a post-secondary education beyond high school. Hartford County, which includes, the suburbs, is at 61%, but that's certainly much lower in the city of Hartford proper. And you can see at the stats below for Hartford County compared to Hartford and New Britain. So then you overlay this over, once again, that preceding slide, and the impact. And so the importance of our students, getting credentials, getting degrees, being supported to get to the finish line is even more important as a result of this. And this is the win-win. And while I'm glad that there are a number of employers and folks from Metro Hartford, et cetera, to understand, the potential in us doing more and better with regard to how we partner and collaborate to get students to degrees and credentials. 2 years ago, Anna Stansberry came to our college, and this was when you could come to college, come to campuses, and we had probably about it's maybe about 200 people, maybe even a little more than that, in our Sentinel Hall, and she had done some analysis, and thus we're glad, very glad to continue our relationship with Harvard and the School of Economics and Education around helping us have the data tell our story. And one of the factoids that she shared with us as a result of her analysis was that when you look at economic mobility and you stack up all of the community colleges in the nation and their how they fare with regard to moving students from poverty to the middle class, that Capital, in fact, is ranked number 33 in the nation. There's about 1,000 community colleges nationally at this point. And so, when you look at that and, what our work results in, that we've been very successful. We hadn't, realized it to the extent until Anna provided us with some this type of level of analysis. As a result of that, we've jumped in, both feet into this work in a very different way, and very desirous of being more intentional and by design and investing in these outcomes. This is I'll talk about this quickly. We were talking about the pandemic, and there were certainly some pandemic gifts, but there are some things from the pandemic that will have long-lasting detrimental impact on the students that we serve. And so on the left side of this slide, it talks about some of the industries that certainly will grow as a result of the pandemic, infrastructural things that have been built as a result, new markets, et cetera. Healthcare, of course, with the long standing aftermath of COVID. And so certainly those industries. On the lower part of the left side talks about how certain industries have been decimated. A lot of us are aware of the number of small businesses and restaurants and things of that nature, hotels that have closed, over the course of the last year. And so and many of our students are in those fields or have, pursued careers in those fields. And so we know that they're going to need to be retrained, et cetera. And so thus the impetus of the work. On the right, it talks about what we've known for quite some time with regard to the importance of having a credential in place, and truly worried about individuals that have no high school diploma, and then those who may have only a diploma, solely a diploma. And so there's huge opportunity for us to really look into what we're doing around certificates and our degrees. Those of you guys that have been around me for the last year and a half, that one of my favorite sayings is first job, a better job, your career. And we know that while we recognize the importance of our students having a liberal arts education and being able to think critically and problem solve and work in teams and have an appreciation for the arts and literature, et cetera, we also know that our students, in a very practical way, are with us to get a job, and starting with the end in mind. And how do we do a better job of ensuring that they're starting in a path that leverages their strengths, their interests, fields that will provide them and their families with wages that allow them to sustain themselves. And so we talk about a continuum that we've done to develop for our students, where we're mindful that many of them, this might be their first job, and there are what we used to call soft skills that are now truly essential skills around how to get and maintain a job that we need to make sure that they're aware of. So we need to help them get that first job where they develop, positive work habits that are common to all work environments. And then from there, after they've taken, our accounting, or maybe they've taken, our public speaking class, or perhaps, they've had a fire in their belly lit by Professor White in her sociology class about serving their community, we recognize that we can get them into a better job that might not require them to work late hours or on the weekend. It might have benefits, it might have tuition reimbursement, et cetera. And so we're very mindful of that and helping them map out that career trajectory. And then we last but not least, we want to make sure that they have what all of us that signed in and signed up for today, which is a career, right? And this idea of the field that they want to be in and what their long-term prospects are by that particular career. Capital has done some amazing work. We have effective models. We have a nationally recognized programs around IFS, Insurance and Financial Services, with our Traveler's Edge program. We have an insurance claims adjuster apprentice program with the Hartford that has also received national attention. We've been working on the stackability. Mayor Bronin referred to that, stackable credentials. We know that people need to come back oftentimes for retraining. And so we've been working to design that in that way. We've got some of our friends who have worked on our Boost program. We received a Kresge grant. We'll have our first graduates from the Boost program this coming Monday. I'm looking forward to that. And that's a collaborative partnership with Catholic Family Charities, the college, SINA, et cetera. And so, so we're career ladders. I know that Don is on here in the YW program. So we have components in place, and we've experienced success. But I think today is about how we can do this even better. And then, of course, the power of the collective is represented here today. And then this idea of the coalition of the willing. We're very desirous of finding overlap in mission and purpose with other folks out there in the vineyard. And we're very hopeful that we could build a strong coalition to have, collective impact on this anti-poverty work that we're engaging in. Who's here today? And so, as of yesterday, we were looking at the registrations, and I apologize in advance if I didn't get you. I think we did the extract, and I got just about everybody. But you can see the collective, right? The vineyard there, and who's represented. We've got business, we've got educational institutions, we've got the city, we've got thought leaders, we've got business and industry, we've got community-based organizations. So I think we've got a phenomenal, amazing group to really do a deeper dive and put something special in place. And then what's underway and up next, and last slide is. This is a program is sponsored by our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Center. Called Carl Guerrieri, who you'll hear from in a minute, is the director, the inaugural director of that, and this is passionate work for him, and he's provided sound leadership in this space. And we're in our Equity Center. There's a lot of work going on around holistic support, removing those barriers. And then we've already begun to bring in partners. And so I know that the YW has a space there. Jumpstart, we have some other folks that are regularly on campus utilizing our Equity Center. Post-COVID landscape, certain industries have been decimated, and we're preparing for that. We're ramping up, we're working with CWP and others to make sure that this summer, there are options in place for not only graduating seniors, but then opportunity youth, reentry, our reentry community. And so we're very focused in on that. We're launching, getting back to our roots and engaged in manufacturing. So we have a program that we'll be launching at Prince Tech, once again, funded in part by CWP. And we launched an Eversource program. So Eversource, moving beyond statements in terms of ensuring that the diversity of their workforce matches the state, reached out, and we have over 66 applicants for 15 slots for a program that will be starting on June 1st. And so we're very excited about that. And we have a program on with drones. And Aqualine Barry Alexander reached out and said he wanted to do something with the college. So we're very entrepreneurial, and I think we're getting better at standing up programs quickly and in time. We have another summer program, Next Step program. And so leading into today, truly excited, thankful, and I thank folks in advance for contributions today, but very excited about the program. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Carl Guerrieri, who is our director of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Center, who will introduce our keynote speakers this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Good morning, everybody. Great to see you and to be with you today. As Dr. Harris said, this is important work. I'm a longtime Hartford resident, and this has been my mission for a long time to create a more equitable city. I'm excited to introduce our keynote speakers today. Rachel Lipson is the inaugural project director of the Project on Workforce, a newly seeded interdisciplinary Harvard initiative focused on policy and research at the intersection of education and labor markets. The project, based at the Malcolm Weiner Center for Social Policy, is a collaboration with the Harvard Business School Managing the Future of Work project and the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Prior to this role, Rachel was director of special projects at Europe, an acclaimed social enterprise and workforce training provider that connects young adults with four-year degrees to meaningful careers in some of America's most prestigious companies. Rachel's portfolio included advisory work on inclusive talent pipelines, community college strategy, and market research. She has previously worked on strategy for JP Morgan Chase's philanthropic investments in workforce training, on small business growth and effective governance at the World Bank, and in training and organizing on President Obama's re-election campaign. Rachel is an alum of Harvard College and the joint MBA MPP program with Harvard's Business School, the Kennedy School of Government. During graduate school, her research on California's community college system for Governor Gavin Newsom was awarded the Kennedy School's Frederick Fisher Prize for Policy Research. Her writing has been published in the Boston Globe, Washington Post Work Blog, and Real Clear Policy. Joining Rachel is Bob Schwartz. He has served on the faculty of Harvard Graduate School of Education from 1996 to 2020. In his 6-decade career in education, he has played a variety of roles, including high school teacher and principal, education advisor to Mayor of Boston and Governor of Massachusetts, director of the Boston Compact, education director of the Pew Charitable Trust, and founding president of Achieve, Inc. In 2011, he co-authored the influential report calling for more attention to career and technical education, pathways to prosperity, meeting the challenge of preparing young Americans in the 21st century. In 2012, with Nancy Hoffman, with Jobs for the Future, he co-founded a national network of states and regions to act upon the analysis and recommendations outlined in the Pathways report. In October 2017, Hoffman and Schwartz published Learning for Careers, their participant observer implementation report on the first 5 years of the Pathways to Prosperity Network. Schwartz is currently senior advisor to Harvard's Interfaculty Project on Workforce. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Schwartz and Dr. Lipson. And they will be making their presentation. And as Dr. Harris said, this will be followed by a discussion.
If I might, real quick before you guys jump in, and I'm hearing Boston, 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 but I want to make sure that everybody on the call this morning knows that the new mayor of Boston, Kim Janey, is attended Capital Community College. And so she started at Capital Community College. You mentioned it in the article this week. And we used to have a program where, and Michelle White, who's on here, I believe that she may is familiar, but students started at Capital, but then transferred to Smith College to complete. And so the first Black and female mayor of Boston is an alum of Capital. So it's very fitting to invite our folks from Boston here today to talk to us about our work and how we could do even more and better in this space. But thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Harris and Carl, for having us. We're so excited to be here with you all this morning. And extremely excited about our new mayor as well, and proud to call her the mayor of Boston. I did not know she was an alum of Capital Community College. That's amazing. Everyone is really excited about our new leadership in the city. So it's great to hear that she came from such a wonderful institution. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Let's see if this works. I'm usually a Zoom user, so bear with me if I have some WebEx challenges. That working? Can folks see?
Yes.
Great. Wonderful. Well, as I said, so excited to be here this morning with all of you. I think I hear a little bit of background noise. If folks could just turn their mute on, I would appreciate. I'm having a little bit of feedback in my headphones. But let me just share a little bit of an overview of what we're going to go through this morning. I'll introduce our work at the Project on Workforce in Harvard and tell you very briefly about our focus and why we are excited and care so deeply about community colleges as a huge part of this ecosystem. I'm going to share a little bit of research, mostly with a national lens, as well as with some focus on Connecticut and Hartford, about the role of community colleges in fostering economic mobility in society and how important they are to that mission. And then I'll share a few thoughts about the role of community colleges, particularly right now, with respect to the COVID recovery. I'm then going to pass it over to my colleague, Professor Schwartz, who will share with you some of his incredible work over the years building the Pathways to Prosperity Network, which I think is very closely linked to your mission here today of bringing together the various stakeholders across sectors and industries and parts of the education system and policy to build more pathways into good jobs for more residents. And he's also going to share some of his work from a recent task force on the role of community colleges in accelerating access to economic opportunity in the country. So that's the agenda for this morning, and then looking forward, hopefully, to having a bit of time to take some questions and discuss with you all and learn more about your work in Hartford. So just very briefly, a little bit. Oh, can you guys see my? Which slide can you guys see right now?
Yeah, we could see your slides. It's not in slideshow mode though, but we could see your slides.
Got it. Okay.
Yep.
I think I should share.
It's sharing, but it's not
It's
in.
sharing it's sharing the wrong screen. Yeah, thanks. I'll just. I'm gonna stop sharing just for a sec. See if I can fix that. Sorry. Thanks for bearing with me.
Not a problem.
How about now?
It's coming, and perfect.
Okay, great. Thanks. All right. So you guys missed the. Here's our conversation agenda for today, but not so important. So let me tell you a little bit about the Project on Workforce. We launched in 2019, and we are a new effort at Harvard University, really to bring together perspectives across education, policy, and business, working across our respective professional schools. Because we really believe, as core to our mission, that this kind of cross-sector and cross-disciplinary collaboration is going to be critical to creating more pathways into good jobs. This is not something that is going to be handled by business alone or by policy alone or by education alone, but really requires everyone working together. We are certainly a research initiative, but we are really focused on doing so with a practitioner lens and generating insights that are relevant for policy, relevant for real people out there in the field like you all who are doing the work to connect more people into good jobs. So here's our mission. We're trying to chart the course for a post-secondary system of the future that creates more and better pathways to economic mobility, and we're working together with stakeholders across business, education, and policy to do that work. So when Carl invited me this morning to give some remarks, he shared a bit about the mission and work for the Equity Center at your school, and I immediately anchored on why we have focused at the Project on Workforce on community colleges as such a critical institution in society, responsible for delivering upward mobility. So I was excited to see Dr. Harris share some data from Opportunity Insights and the Equality, formerly known as the Equality of Opportunity Project, and some of our colleagues at Harvard, including David Deming, who is one of our faculty leads at the Project on Workforce, is a big piece of this research. But what I'm showing you right now is some of the national data about the roles of the different parts of the higher education system. And you can see the community colleges tax returns in the country, and they were able to link children with their parents for the first time. So really interesting, really important data. And what they were able to see is that community colleges were actually responsible for the largest share of success stories in terms of upward mobility in this country, which is what they define as moving from the bottom 20% of the income distribution in terms of the family that you are born into as a child to the top 20% as an adult. Now, it's worth noting, as probably many of you know, that community colleges nationally serve a large share of students. So in terms of individual percentage of, if I'm an individual, am I most likely to experience economic mobility if I enter community college relative to, say, selective public? That's not necessarily the case, but the institutions as a whole are at scale delivering the most number of people kind of and taking them from the bottom to the top. And as Dr. Harris showed, Capital Community College, consistent with this mission, has been a high performer on economic mobility. So I pulled this data from 2 years ago. It's featured on the New York Times from the Opportunity Insights research, Raj Chetty and colleagues. You can see here, I'm sure none of this data is surprising to you, but Capital Community College serving students below median incomes, disproportionately likely to come from the bottom 20% of the income distribution compared to other schools in Connecticut as well as in the country. And yet, Capital Community College is overperforming in terms of the share of your students that do move up at least 2 income quintiles in their lifetime. In addition, for those who are what they call the big success stories of moving all the way from the bottom up to the top, you can see the green squares mean that the Capital Community College is a high performer relative to peers. I did want to share a bit too about why part of the story about why community colleges are so important in economic mobility, and a huge piece of that is because of who they serve. So we know from research and from data that community colleges serve the most racially diverse segment of the population of U.S. undergraduate students. So this is some data from the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Study a few years ago in the U.S. Department of Education. But you can see that the public 2-year sector is serving a disproportionate share of Black and Latinx students. You can also see from data that community colleges are the most socioeconomically representative of all of the types of higher education institutions. So what this chart shows you is the socioeconomic status of students starting in the bottom quintile and going up to the top. And you can see if you look at that bottom quintile that 61% of students who are born into the bottom 20% of incomes in their families are attending a 2-year institution. And the relationship reverses as you go up the income scale. So when you get up to the top 20%, the numbers have flipped, and you're seeing most of those, or a plurality of those students, are attending highly selective 4-year institutions, which implies that there's still a lot of work to do in this country around equality of opportunity as it relates to higher education. And I think one of the most important pieces here is, unlike in the K-12 system, where at least as a country, we've made an acknowledgement that the schools that serve the hardest to serve students should receive additional funding to do so. That has not really applied in higher ed. So at a national level, community colleges are really receiving significantly less public resources to serve their students, in spite of the data that we just saw around income levels and race. So this is just some data showing the revenue gap between public four-year institutions and public 2 years. And unfortunately, this hasn't been closing significantly over time. And I think that's a big piece of why your all's work is so critical, particularly around the Center for Equity. So what we know from the research is that wraparound supports in a community college setting have actually really succeeded in making a difference for students. This chart that you see on this page is perhaps one of the more acclaimed studies that have happened in the last few years. So this is from the City University of New York's ASAP program in a community college setting. And a big piece of the ASAP program was really focused around this wraparound support idea. So giving students access to more personalized attention. And you can see from the chart that they found statistically significant increases in associate degree attainment for both 2-year and 3-year for students who received those extra levels of supports. There's also research backing the importance of supports like access to housing, mental health services, food insecurity, transportation, childcare. We know that all of those things make a difference for students' ability to actually stay in school and complete their program. And yet, to the earlier slide, unfortunately, at least at a federal level and usually at a state level as well, we're not providing necessarily the level of resources that would be required to make those services available to all students. And now I'm going to flip a little bit just to talk about COVID and what I think the role of community colleges like Capital Community College in their recovery can be. So I actually pulled some data specifically on Hartford because I wanted to see what was going on in your region. And you can see that these lines are actually like quite stark. This does reflect national trends, but I think is actually even a tiny bit more disparate in Hartford than the national data would show, which is basically that in terms of unemployment and changes in employment rates, low-wage workers have been hit disproportionately hard by this crisis. So you can see that green line, which is the change in employment for workers making under $27,000 a year compared to what the economists who did this research call middle wage and high wage workers making between 27 and 60K or above 60K. And the change in the employment rate for those for low wage workers has just been dramatically sharper. So we know who's losing jobs. And I would argue that the community college system has a huge role to play in being able to service the needs of some of those workers and helping them to transition back into work, and particularly an opportunity to help them transition back into better paying jobs and better economic opportunities coming out from this crisis. Another point just around COVID is we also know that community colleges are more likely to serve students who have been affected by the crisis. This graph here just shows, this is some research from last year showing the characteristics of the people who were least likely to work from home, which meant that they were often either in roles where they were reporting to work and at more exposure to the virus, or in which case they were furloughed or laid off because the jobs were not able to be replicated in a home setting. And you can see just the data around if you're below median income, if you're non-white, if you're a renter, if you don't have a four-year degree, if you don't have employer health care, all of those characteristics correlated with its population of individuals who were the least likely to be able to work from home. And I would argue that many of these characteristics also correlate with who community colleges are more likely to serve than any other post-secondary institution. I just threw a few data points here of around that 69% of entering community college students nationally are working for pay. And over a third are first generation college students. I also just looked at Capital's data and saw that your average age is 28, which is significantly higher than four-year peers. And then just a final point I wanted to make was around looking back on the last recession and the recovery from the Great Recession and the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. And what we see in that data is that workers who had just a high school degree or below were hit extremely hard in the layoffs, and many of the jobs never came back in the recovery. Whereas associate's degree holders fared relatively better. I mean, this graph does not show for you how bachelor's and master's degrees holders fared, which was even better than the associate's degree holders, but basically the last time around the recovery was quite unequal and quite divided, and I do fear that we're going to see similar trends this time around, which is why the role of the community college system becomes even more important in being able to get people access during this downturn to additional credentials that can help them return into better jobs when the economy does bounce back. And this is my final slide, which is actually pulling some data from Connecticut as a state. So I was really interested to see in Dr. Harris's presentation the data for Hartford, which shows an even a smaller share of workers in the city who have a BA. So probably some of these trends are even more dramatic in Hartford itself, but this is statewide data. It's showing that 56% of workers in Connecticut, it's a few years ago now, 2017, did not have a BA. A little less than half of those workers had what the researchers at Georgetown define as a good job. I believe, I'm trying to remember, they changed income levels based on age. So between, I believe it was $45,000 a year. But you can see, I think the one piece that I wanted to highlight here is just some of the shifts that are going on in the broader economy. In Connecticut, actually, the data is more stark than in other states, which was around over about a 25-year time period. Connecticut has lost a number of good jobs in blue-collar industries, whether they be manufacturing or other types of technical work. But is gaining good jobs still, even for workers without a bachelor's degree in skilled service industries. And so there is this broader transition going on in the economy that we've seen over the last probably 50 years. I believe that like what we're seeing from COVID is that many of these things are likely to continue and potentially accelerate. And I would argue that the community college system has a huge role to play in helping individuals navigate through that transition and help make the changes that may be necessary to get from one job into another and get access to training and networks and resources to fill the new jobs of the future. So let me pass it over now to my colleague, Professor Schwartz. I will say that neither Bob nor I are doctors, although I appreciate the connotation. We are kind of practitioner researchers, but neither with doctoral degrees. So maybe in some ways that hopefully makes us more accessible. But we've really focused on the combination of doing the research and then actually out there doing the work. So Bob, let me hand it over to you.
Thanks, Rachel, especially for blowing my cover here. I thought I could get away with being a doctor in this environment, but in any event, I've somehow made my way through life. As Carl said in introducing me, although I've been university has been my home base really for the last 25 years. I really have continued to have one foot in the world of policy and practice, and I really think of myself much more as a policy and practitioner. I'm not a never have been a researcher. The Pathways to Prosperity report that we put out in 2011, there were three of us, Ron Ferguson, an economist from the Kennedy School, who's really built a career mostly around studying the racial achievement gap and being an activist working with school districts that really want to address the challenge of reducing gaps in performance. And then, in some ways, most critically for us, the third person in our team happened to be a visiting journalist, Bill Simons, who covered education for Business Week for many years. And one reason I think the report got a lot of take up is that it wasn't written in the typical language of academics. It was written by a journalist, pretty aggressive language. You can see just from this one or these two sentences, plucked from the report, that this is really a report that is calling people to action. Interestingly enough, we didn't load our report up with recommendations. What we really were trying to do was put a problem on the table. And I would say, just to give a 2-minute summary of a 50-page report, we basically said, put 3 questions out there. The first one really had to do with educational attainment. 20 years into the movement to raise academic standards in our schools, when we looked at educational attainment of 25-year-olds in the US, it was really kind of stunning to realize that although 90% of kids said they were going off to attend some post-secondary education institution when they graduated from high school, 70%, nearly 70% actually did enroll in some institution post-high school, in October of the following year. If you asked about, again, this question of by age 25, what proportion had actually attained a 4-year degree, when we looked at that, it was 28%. It's been creeping up. It's now probably about 34 or 35%. So the first big question is, well, that's great, but what's our strategy for the other 2/3 of young people in the country, particularly in a world in which the returns to education and skills are rising kind of exponentially? The second question really had to do with what was really going on, in the labor market, looking through the other end of the telescope. And although at the time, we think, one reason that parents were saying to their kids, you've got to go on to higher education, is that some economists, at least, were really, saying the world is really moving into a world in which there are really only going to be 2 kinds of jobs: high wage, high skill jobs for people with at least a 4-year degree, and everybody else is going to be consigned to low wage, low skill work. We didn't buy that. And as we started really probing the numbers and talking to more economists, it became clear to us that while 2/3 of jobs that people were projecting to by 2020 were going to require some post-secondary education, we concluded that at least half of those jobs, and including some very good jobs, this comes back to Rachel's point about good jobs that pay without a BA, but particularly jobs with a strong technical foundation, there were going to be at least half of the jobs requiring higher education that would really be available to people who had something beyond high school, but not necessarily a 4-year degree. So that's what really brought us to really start to focus on community colleges in particular. In any event, the third thing the question we put on the table was, when you looked at comparatively at countries and how they survived, how well they survived the recession of the 28, 29, 2008, 2009, 2010 recession, what was really striking, if you looked at how did youth fare and what were the youth employment and unemployment numbers in those countries with really strong vocational education and training systems had single-digit youth unemployment going into the recession and came out of it with single-digit youth unemployment, while the US numbers were really double digits. And particularly if you zeroed in on the cities, we were looking at reported rates of maybe up to 20%, and everybody who does this work knows that if anything, those rates are really underreported, because to be considered unemployed, you have to actually be looking for work and get picked up by the unemployment system. So our third question really was, why aren't we looking outside the US, particularly to countries that seem to do a much better job than we do at getting the large proportion of their young people successfully through the transition from the end of compulsory education into the labor market with skills and credentials that really have some value. And by the way, I also, and I should say parenthetically, over the last 15 years, I've had a chance because of relationships with two organizations that do comparative work. I've had a chance to spend time looking pretty closely at the vocational education and training systems in Germany, in Switzerland, in the Netherlands, in Denmark, Singapore, Australia. So I've got a reasonable sense, I think, of what higher performing systems actually look like. And one of the things that really strikes me is that not only do they do a better job of helping young people make a successful transition from school to working life, but they also do a better job of helping adolescents make a successful transition to young adulthood and come out the other end, by 19 or 20 or 21 with a sense of agency and purpose. And, I can see a future for myself, and I can feel that, I can control my own destiny in a way that I think an awful lot of young people in the US simply don't arrive at age 21 or 22 with that same sense of agency and purpose and accomplishment. So in any event, we put out this report. We got a lot of interest. We invited a handful of states to join with us. And us in this case, I immediately, even before the report was out, I went to this organization in Boston called Jobs for the Future. It's been around for 35 years. Now it's got 170 people, and it's entirely focused on kind of education and workforce development, particularly for low-income young people and adults. They have a lot of experience running multi-state networks, so they were the obvious people for me to kind of go to and say, would you like to partner and see if we can get a group of states to work with us to try to figure this out? As I say, we put problem on the table. We didn't have a lot of solutions in our back pockets, and we said, let's find some folks who really buy the argument that we're making and want to work with us. So if we can go to the next slide, we created this Pathways to Prosperity network, started with a handful of states, and over the years, it's grown. There's a big chunk in the middle of the country where we haven't had much impact, but the dark green represents the states, or in some cases, the regions that have joined the network as members. And I won't go into the detail about what it means to be a network member, but basically, there is a sort of dues process. We require our members to contribute money to the network, but in return, they get technical assistance and support, not only from us, but because twice a year, we bring our network members together, typically leadership teams of 8 or 10 people from each member. And we spent a couple of days in pretty intensive, kind of peer learning and it's more a workshop kind of mode than a kind of conference mode, if you will. The states with the places where their circles are where our team is doing work, typically on contract, but these places are not necessarily members of our network. And the lighter green represents the places that join the network, were with us typically for 3 or 4 years and then moved on. Our premise was we asked people to commit for 3 years because the kind of work we do doesn't happen overnight. I want to say a word about how people join, because it's very much in sync with Dr. Harris's comment about the coalition of the willing. And the example I'll give, actually, we started with states, but 2 years in, Dave Harrison, who's the president of Columbus State Community College, called me. He'd heard me give a presentation, and he said, I know you're talking about states, but we play a major role in our region in terms of the region's economic development. I don't know that our state's interested, and frankly, I'm not so interested in getting enmeshed with the state. Columbus, as you probably know, happens to be the capital of Ohio. But he said, we've got a really good working relationship with the Columbus Compact, which is an organization driven by the largest employers in the region. What you're talking about is what we're already beginning to do. Can we join? And I said to him, well, absolutely open to this idea. I'll tell you what. You put together around a conference table 15 people in the region who you believe, if they could come together and agree on a strategy, could actually make something happen in the region. So, it's K-12 leaders, it's employer leaders, it's people from the workforce system, people from youth-serving organizations, people from the private foundation community. You know the players, bring them together. I'll come out. I will make a presentation and tell you what we do. I will stay around as long as people have questions. I will leave the room. And then what I want you to do is, help this group come to a decision. Yes, this makes sense for Columbus, or no, it doesn't. But I want to, I don't want a prolonged process. And, I left the room. They decided this made sense for them. And Columbus has been a place that we've been working with really closely. And a community college, Columbus State has been the driver of the work. In other states, it's, other organizations, and soon afterwards, we got a similar call from the workforce development leader of the United Way in the Twin Cities. Same kind of conversation, same thing happened. Madison, Wisconsin happened to have a new superintendent of schools who came through the Harvard program that prepared urban superintendents. She called, same kind of strategy. So we've had these 3 metro regions, and then we added New York City, Philadelphia as cities came in, and a couple of smaller cities as well, Long Beach, California, and Lawrence, Massachusetts. Why don't we go to the next slide, Rachel, if we can. So what are we really trying to do? I won't, go through the details, but essentially what we're trying to do is redesign systems that can more effectively serve all people. And our view is this is not, only for some kids. We think politically it's really important to create a strategy that works for all kids. Our goal is to have all young people complete high school and have gotten started on college. We're big believers in dual enrollment and in the early college high school movement. One reason I went to Jobs for the Future is they were the organization the Gates Foundation anointed to really build a national early college high school movement, which has been, if you don't know about that, the data is really powerful for kids who don't come from college going families. Get them started with at least a year of post-secondary education before they leave high school, and their high school graduation rates, their college enrollment rates, their likelihood of completing at least a first degree in college is much higher. But notice the next big goal was to attain a first post-secondary credential with value in the labor market. And where does that happen? That happens in community and technical colleges. And we put a lot of emphasis on that first credential having value in the labor market. And then our notion is if we can get kids started, get them launched in careers in fields where there's high growth and high demand, that can move them on a path toward a middle class family supporting wage. Again, as Dr. Harris said, if you pick the right companies, you can take advantage of their tuition assistance programs to go on if that's what you really want to do. And a lot of companies will really invest in their young workers to get them more education, more skills, more credentials. So that was our basic strategy. We can go to the next slide, Rachel. Very interestingly, we were hardly the first to folks to be in this work. Our work builds off of organizations like the National Academy Foundation, whose board I was on for many years. There's a lot of work in the sort of career pathways space, if you will, high schools that work in the southern region. But most of that work tends to start in high school and basically to be focused on using career and technical education as an engagement and motivator, to get kids to sit still and complete high school. And we started out, even though our goal ultimately was employment, we started working with high schools and thought we would map upward from there. We learned pretty quickly that if the goal is employment, you want to start at the other end. You want to reverse engineer. You want to start with employers and really try to figure out in your region, what are the in-demand careers and what are the skills that young people need if they're going to have access to those careers. So we developed a kind of skills mapping process where we would bring employers and community college folks together to really kind of build a curriculum and then map backward to connect high schools. If you notice in this slide, one of the interesting things, and the reason I've come to believe that community colleges are absolutely the key institution for this work, is that they sit between high schools on the one side and employers on the other. We like to believe that we can do much more to mobilize employers to work with high schools, but by and large, U.S. employers are very skeptical that 16 or 17-year-olds can add value in their workplace. And it's no accident that when companies like Siemens and Bueller and Toyota come to the U.S. and establish plants here and want to recreate their own experience from their home country's training systems, they tend to go first to the community college in the region and start with them. And the best of these programs then map back and pick kids up in high school and get them connected. So we see community colleges as absolutely central here. Next slide, please, Rachel. if you want to know why the other reason for focusing so much on community colleges, take a look at this slide. This is really, really extremely depressing but powerful data. This slide uses family wealth, not income, as the key indicator here. It looks at all people born in the 1970s and in the 1980s and divides them into three groups. Those who come from the 20% of the highest wealth families, the middle 40%, and then the bottom 40%. Think about this, the bottom 40% by family wealth distribution, and asks two questions. What proportion of people by 25 had some post-secondary education? And that's the dotted line. And you can see, look, the high wealth group was already, over 80% were participating in post-secondary education. But in the middle group and the bottom group, the good news is over this 2-decade period, enrollment in post-secondary education has been pretty steadily rising. Even for the bottom 40%, it's now, up to about 50% of kids enrolling in some post-secondary education. But again, if you ask the harder question, by age 25, what percentage had completed a 4-year degree? Just look at that left-hand slide, left-hand box. Over a 20-year period, the needle only moved from 11.3% to 11.8%. And there was a 0.5 percentage point increase. In the middle, as you can see, which is, I mentioned before, we have actually moved from, the mid to high 20s to now to about a third of kids, nationally. But again, if you disaggregate by family wealth, we're really stuck. To me, the big meaning of this slide is if we're waiting around for 4-year higher ed institutions to solve the problem of economic mobility for kids from low wealth families, it's going to be a very, very, very long wait. Therefore, we've got to focus on the institution that serves a big chunk of those kids, and we've got to figure out how to help community and technical colleges really focus on their workforce mission and really try to make sure that whether you stay there for 1 year, or 2 years, you leave with something of value, a credential of value in the labor market. That's the only way, in my view, the contribution to solving this problem that the education system is going to make has to come primarily from the 2-year sector of our system. Let's move on, Rachel. This is a bit wonky slide, but because we now have the capacity in at least a handful of states to connect wage records to education records, we can begin to see over time what the returns are to different kinds of credentials. And here, the big story, just to oversimplify, is yes, it's absolutely true that on balance, the more education you get, the better off you're going to be in the labor market. We've all seen those bar graphs that show the returns over a lifetime. But once you start to disaggregate, and you think, if this is the one state, this is Colorado, and you just look at the bottom, what's bracketed in red, and what you can see, the interesting thing about this is this looks at young people 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years out into the labor market. And even 10 years out, 2-year, those with 2-year applied degrees, if their skills match up with the demands of their regional labor market, they're absolutely keeping up with the average 4-year BA degree holder in Colorado. So, and again, I have lots of other information that makes the same point here. Again, it's no longer simply how much education you've gotten, but to what degree do your skills match the requirements of your regional labor market. Next slide, please. So Carl referenced the fact that actually for about 18 months, maybe over in 2018 and 2019, I had the pleasure of being part of a working group that was really focused on community colleges, and especially trying to figure out how do we actually strengthen the workforce mission of community colleges. And why community colleges? First, because of reach and scale. Community college, there are actually about 1,200 community and technical colleges. Almost every, except for people who live in the most remote areas, almost everyone is within commuting distance of a community or technical college. The best of them are really rooted in their regional labor markets. The best of them, again, as Dr. Harris said, are really nimble. They're entrepreneurial. They're able to respond much more quickly than 4-year institutions are to the needs of their regional economy, and they serve both college age and mid-career learners. And I would argue that the big challenge for community colleges these days is both to address the problem I've been focused on, which is the young people, but also, as Rachel pointed out, I mean, there's a huge challenge right in front of us, which is all of the workers who've been suddenly displaced, the low-wage workers in fields whose jobs, are really shrinking and in many cases may not come back. So community colleges, if we can, if they're really focused on these problems, combining short-term credentials for those who need short-term credentials to get back into the labor market, and focusing on this problem of providing 2-year technical degrees that have value in the labor market for young people, these are now critically important challenges. Let's go to the next if we can, Rachel. Just a couple of more really on, the obvious point here about, reach and scale. We hear a lot of buzz in the workforce world about, coding boot camps and the training programs funded through the federal government's WIOA, Workforce Investment Act, and the rising interest in apprenticeships. And I'm a huge fan of apprenticeships. But if you ask, how many folks do these kinds of programs serve versus community colleges? Community colleges dwarf the efforts of and numbers of young people who can be served, through these other programs. And so it's about nationally, it's about just under 12 million students in community colleges, roughly evenly divided between those on the credit side and those on the non-credit side. Next, please. So, obviously community colleges, they're complicated institutions. They have multiple missions, and they have to figure out, some way of balancing the transfer function and their workforce function. But, I have to say, again, nationally, if you look at these numbers, so nearly 80% of full-time, first-time community college students arrive on the doorstep of a community college and they say, we're here to get started on a 4-year degree. And historically, that's what a lot of community colleges were set up to do, to provide the first 2 years of a 4-year degree. But if you ask, again, the hard question, 6 years later, what proportion of those young people have attained a 4-year degree? It's only 13%. Now, is it fair to hold community colleges accountable for what happens to those who get a 2-year degree and transfer? Well, obviously not primarily, but on the other hand, it's irresponsible, I would argue, for community colleges not to really look hard at this number and really ask themselves, what do we know about those who leave us? And in particular, I would say, if roughly 42% of 2-year degrees are in liberal arts and general studies, well, if a 2-year degree, if that's all you get, if you're one of those who heads off to a 4-year degree and doesn't make it, yes, you've gotten some other value from that experience. But if we're just looking in terms of labor market outcomes, a 2-year degree in liberal arts and general studies, especially for Black and Latinx kids, it has almost no value in the labor market. I can make an argument that you would have been better off going straight from high school into the labor market, because you wouldn't have had the opportunity costs of being, of the number of years that you've been out of the labor market or only working part-time. So this is a tough question for community colleges to answer. I think I only have one more slide, and it's simply to say that we made a lot of recommendations in our report. It's called the Indispensable Institution, about not only how community colleges need to work on, for example, really blurring the lines between their non-credit and credit programs. We argue that all programs at community colleges ought to offer a mix of academic and more career-focused education. We argue that states ought to redesign their accountability and funding systems for community colleges to really reward community colleges based, at least in part, on labor market outcomes of their graduates. And we now are able to track those. And Rachel pointed out earlier, community colleges generally, and capital community colleges more specifically, will do really well on that metric. So anyway, that's ends at least the comments that I want to make. And I don't know, Carl, how much time we have for Q&A, but Rachel and I will be more than happy to take whatever questions people might have.
Thank you very much, Rachel and Bob. I will demote you and not call you doctor.
You can give us honorary doctorates. We'd be happy to take those.
Let's say it's doctoral presentation. Thank you very much. We have about 15 minutes for questions, so look forward to some interesting commentary.
And Carl, are we raising hands or are we putting them in the chat, or how would you prefer?
People can raise hands or, yeah.
Well, I'll get it started. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand. Let me go in here and raise my hand so that I'm official.
You have
There we go.
presidential.
Yeah, I got you. I'll give you one. I'm going to give you one of these too, because I thoroughly enjoyed. I'll give you a couple of those. Thoroughly enjoyed the presentation, you know, we have some aspirational goals, right? And I think we've been doing a deeper dive. We understand our role once again as an anti-poverty institution, you know, and how we partner with other folks on on this video presentation this morning in that work. And I think Hartford, like I said, that it feels a little bit different. You know, there's some amazing spirit around collaborating and recognizing how we can leverage the limited resources that we have for better income outcomes for our students. I guess one of the things that I've been saying is I've got 34%, but if Donna puts in 33 with the YW, and then you know, Jim at LISC gives us the other 33, we get the student to the 100% that's necessary, right? On our own, our solo efforts, you know, don't yield that outcome. And so we're you know, I guess we're refining that thinking, and hopefully we're able to refine it in a way in which we have a presentation like Bob and Rachel one day about what we're able to do. But could you share in your travels some of the exemplars, like, and so this idea of communities where you know, the folks like we have on the line today made a decision, you know, 5 or 6 years ago that they were going to lock arms together, you know, as a coalition and move the efforts of the city forward with their anti-poverty efforts. And so are there some folks that we should, you know, be looking at and saying, hey, you know, these folks are where you are, you know, 6 or 7 years ago?
Yeah, well, certainly I would put Columbus. You know, it was no accident that I picked Columbus, in part because that's a place where the community college really was the driver. And interestingly enough, in the Columbus, you know, kind of compact and pathways work, Dave Harrison persuaded the superintendent, who was most respected in the region, to come to the community college, and he set up, you know, kind of an office to drive this pathways work, but it was driven by the superintendent of schools, who was the most respected in the region, a guy named Steve Dakin, and you know, they've done a great job. We've helped them raise, you know, millions and millions of dollars from you know, first a $14 million grant from the state that was having an innovation grant competition, and then from the federal, you know, innovation program in the education department. You mentioned, or I guess it was the mayor who mentioned this Aspen project. You know, Arizona has been a state of art where we've been very heavily involved. As it happens, the organization that's the kind of the coordinating organization is something called the Center for the Future of Arizona, which happens to be lodged in Arizona State University. But Maricopa has played a major role, as you probably know. I mean, it's a huge community college that has a long history of working both in coordination with its university system, you know, transfer programs looking up, but also building stronger relationships with all the school districts in the region. And they've been really good players. Chicago, the other, you know, place, is a very interesting Chicago apprenticeship network that's developed pretty recently. That, as it happens, two insurance companies. You know something about insurance in Hartford. Aon and Zurich Insurance, along with Accenture, have been the employers that have really driven that work. And they are very, you know, they've been very. I went to a big meeting out there where they were launching this apprenticeship network, and it was really employer driven. And that's the other, the point I wanted to make in that when I was talking about reverse engineering and starting with where the jobs are, this work, if it's really going to take hold, has to be much more demand driven than supply driven. And if you ask me, in one sentence, what's the difference between highest performing vocational education and training systems elsewhere and ours? It's the role of employers. The employers need to come together by sector and act in their self-interests. They need, and by the way, I would argue, generally speaking, about collaboration. Collaboration works when each of the players around the table comes to realize that they can accomplish their own goals more effectively by working with others rather than going it alone. And that's the argument for, your coalition of the willing idea. If people can agree, here's the problem that we all want to solve. And it really is around creating clear pathways to move young people, out of poverty into, get them started on careers where, if they work at it, they can pretty quickly put themselves on a path to have a family supporting wage. And if people can agree that that's a problem we want to tackle, then you can figure out, okay, what's the role of each? The smallest state in our network, Delaware, is the state that's made the most progress, I would argue, in addressing this. And again, because it's so small, you can argue it's easy, but Rhode Island, another small place, has not done so well. It's not a place we've done some work for them, but they've not been a network member. And it works in a way when you've got the right people around the right table and they really can see their self-interest. Delaware Tech is the community college for the state of Delaware. It has multiple campuses, but it really sees itself as primarily being it's Delaware Technical and Community College. Everybody knows it as Del Tech. The president, Mark Brainerd, is really clear. We're in the workforce development business. That's our mission. And if I showed you a kind of a Delaware pathway strategic plan, what you'd see is it's very simple. It's got 5 key elements, and each element has either a public agency or a nonprofit or some partnership agency responsible for taking the lead in each of those 5 elements in the plan. They have a kind of scorecard that they use to sort of measure progress and hold one another accountable. When we started working with them in 2014, they had 27 high school kids in an advanced manufacturing program at Del Tech. They set themselves a target of in 5 years, and they really got started in 2015, in 5 years, having 20,000 kids, which is 50% of their high school kids, in career pathways. They did this, we helped them do a sort of analysis of their regional labor market, where the growth opportunities are. They then developed these pathways programs aligned with their regional labor market needs. And then they very systematically introduce these programs into the schools. All programs connect to post-secondary, especially to Del Tech, but they have agreements with their 4-year public and private institutions in the state. And I just hosted a presentation for our students a couple of weeks ago with the two of the leaders of the Delaware plan. They now have over 20,000 kids. Now, there's more than half of their kids are now in these career pathways programs, all aligned with post-secondary, and they have really ramped up dual enrollment. And the Pathways program is the biggest user of their dual enrollment system, and so kids are in these programs of study, to use the federal terminology, that start in secondary school and move on. What they've been really working at is trying to ramp up their employer engagement, but they've got now have, in particular, a kind of a technology council of employers, 25 employers who've come together to really, work with this system, and they're building similar kinds of employer networks in other fields as well. They're a really great place to look at. We can send you material, on Delaware. By the way, I'm not here to proselytize for the Pathways Network. I'm just trying to describe a way of working and a way of thinking about this problem, and a role that a community college like yours that's wants to play and is already playing a kind of convening role, how you can bring others together to really move the needle. Let me just make, this is a long-winded answer, but let me just make two suggestions. I've worked a lot over the last 3 or 4 years with a broad coalition in New York City. They've put together a really powerful plan called Career Ready NYC, and again, we can send you a link to that. But basically, what they've done is, I mean, and if I were, I mean, one way for you, Dr. Harris, in particular, to think about this is think about the public education system in Hartford as really running from pre-K through grade 14. In other words, to think about and the places, the regions in the country where I've worked a lot over many years and that I most admire happen to be El Paso and Long Beach. And in both cases, they've built these very strong collaborative relationships where there really is kind of seamless between the secondary and post-secondary. The Career Ready program in New York City, so it really runs from grade 6 through grade 16. CUNY, 75% of kids who go on to higher ed in New York, go into the CUNY system. In Hartford, I mean, as the mayor said, for Hartford kids, you're it in terms of public higher education. So not only think about this as a single public education system, but think about this as a single talent development system. And that's, I mean, in terms of engaging employers, basically said, this is where your labor pool is going to come from. And the mayor's absolutely right. In New York City, it's even a worse problem. The kids from Columbia and NYU and other places, they may or may not stay in New York. It's the CUNY graduates who stay in New York. And, and in Hartford, I'm confident it's the same thing. So if employers can begin to see the education system, particularly, I would argue grades 9 through 14, as a kind of talent development system, you might be able to get them to take a more activist role in helping you kind of shape that system. In the US, employers basically, because they see education as the responsibility of the educators that may ask them for advice. Take a look at our program and tell us if it meets your needs. In other countries, these systems are co-developed by organizations that represent employers, sector by sector, and educators. And ideally, that's where you want to aim. Co-development around these programs, really to make sure that they're aligned. And also, by the way, if they're co-developed, what happens in these strong European systems is the employers pay kids, while they're in these programs. If you're last thing I'll say, in Switzerland, which by the way, a quarter of kids in Switzerland weren't born there. 70% of high school age kids are in these so-called dual system programs where they're splitting their time between work in an apprenticeship model and aligned education. They're getting, the equivalent of, $800 a month when they start and $1,100 a month when they leave 3 years later. They've got skills and credentials that really are portable. And, a sense of, as I said, of agency and purpose. We somehow have to figure out how to get our employer communities to invest, to support, summer jobs in their paid summer jobs, as well as, in more co-op and other kinds of programs. And they really ought, in my view, ought to span grades 11 through 14. You want to get kids started on these programs that are at the community college, and then get employers to kind of co-own the development of them. So end of speech.
Oh, great. Thank you. And I see we do have Aaron Haberman from Travelers, and the EDGE model replicates exactly what you're talking about. And so we've got some exemplars that, but not enough, clearly, not enough. Thank you.
I may jump in really quickly on this, which is just with the sort of broader workforce system angle as well. A place that I've spent a lot of time looking at California's community colleges, and a place I really admire is LA Trade Tech. And one of the interesting things they've done is first they brought the American Job Center, so their one-stop through the workforce system onto their campus, so that they're bringing, in terms of the kind of adult population, not just thinking about the high schools as a entry point. They were physically bringing members of the community onto the campus, and at the same time, you're coming for job support, but you learn about the community college programs. It wound up being a really effective recruitment tool for them, and in kind of an integration and collaborative strategy with integration with the broader workforce system. They also became the lead agency on they applied back in 2016 for the U.S. for the HUD had a Promise Zone competition. I don't know if Hartford participated in that competition, but LA Trade Tech was the lead agency on their application. They were successful. They won millions of dollars, and they brought 50 different community-based organizations in South LA on board with them in that plan. And they really used the grant competition as an ability to kind of align around a strategy. They brought the unions on board as well. They have a bunch of boot camps and parallel tracks for launching students into union apprenticeships, working with the LA County Federation of Labor, including formerly incarcerated residents, getting them into jobs in the construction trades. And again, the community college in that city really served as the focal point of the effort of bringing in all of these other organizations in South LA towards a vision of how do we make sure that good jobs come to our neighborhood in South LA, and that this campus is going to be the geographic and physical focal point for where you come when you want to get access to those good jobs.
I think Raina has her hand up, and then Raina.
Yes, good morning. This has been wonderful. I was wondering if you studied it. Earlier you were talking about ways to support community college and different types of funding. I lived in Atlanta for about 13 years when they had the Hope Scholarship. They still have it, but they've changed it. And the Hope Scholarship was funded through the lottery system. And so the money, their belief at that time was no child should be without, if they want to go to college, community college, go to a technical school, they should be able to go without having to worry about how they're going to finance it. And from what I understand, it was very successful. And then, over time, because of politics or what have you, they've since changed that. And now, you have to go to a 4-year college. There's a lot of requirements now that would now disadvantage, the population that we're talking about. And so I just never forgot that. I thought it was very successful. It made an impact. It's the lottery, so that's when people have extra money, obviously. So I just wondered if you've, looked at that as a potential model, and if that's something that we could potentially consider here.
Well, actually, I think and hope that where we're heading is toward free community college. And we already have a bunch of states that have figured that out. Tennessee is the first state that joined our network, and it's the state has been there ever since. The 3-year period came and went, and they said, "Oh no, we're not nowhere near done yet. We need," and they've been a real leader, and they pioneered. I think among the states, Delaware also has a similar kind of model. But I think the Biden administration is really likely to push hard on this. I still think, that as the mayor said, and I think, I moved quickly through the slide about the, how stuck low wealth, families are, that kids from low wealth families around completing a 4-year degree. And I'd simply make the same point about that problem that the mayor was making about the dropout, the problem at the community college, which is unless we're prepared to really address all the other barriers that prevent young people from completion, and it's childcare, it's transportation. And the reason I like using wealth rather than income is we know that if you're in the bottom 40% of the wealth distribution, your bank account, average bank account is $400 in terms of savings. You're one event away, from a real problem. And over a 6-year period, the likelihood is for a kid from a low wealth family, the likelihood of some non-education related event coming along, it can be your car collapses, it can be your babysitting arrangements don't work, it can be a sudden health emergency, whatever, what can force you to kind of stop out. And then once you've stopped out, incentive to return, particularly if you start out needing to take non-credit classes because you got shunted off to developmental education rather than credit-bearing education. I mean, all those things kind of conspire together. So free community college, I think, would be great, and I do think, as I said, but we ought to think about public education now, is leading through grade 14. I'm not a fan of trying to extend this to 4-year colleges and universities. I think the likelihood of spending federal dollars to advantage families that don't really need it is.
Seems like we lost Bob for a second. I'm happy to jump in with one more comment on this, which is that I've observed some of the local free community college efforts in different cities and or new funding sources that emerge that are funded by city government or have creative financing mechanisms. In Boston, we actually about 2 years ago launched our citywide in education circles is not a word that people often like to use, but the outreach and getting the word out. I think there's often an assumption that if you figure out the funding, if you build it, people will come. And the reality is that even in our current system, so many people are unaware of the financing that they could access. So in the economics literature, they've run a number of these experiments. For instance, there was a study in Ohio a few years ago that came out where during the Great Recession, they just mailed letters to people letting them know about their Pell Grant eligibility if you were claiming unemployment. And they ran a randomized control trial. So that means they send the letter to some people and they don't send it to others. And there was a statistically significant difference in the uptake enrollment of the adults who received that letter, indicating that many people just are not aware of, you go on the website and you see the price tag, or maybe you don't even go on the website. You don't know, you associate that college is expensive and that the courses are beyond what you can afford and are not necessarily aware of what kinds of funding resources they may qualify for. So yes, we absolutely need more funding, but I would also say that if and when free community college comes, a huge part of the mission is really going to be getting the word out into the community. And so much of that will need to be done through partners. Some piece of that will probably need to be done digitally and online as well. I mean, I do think it's interesting in this crisis that the only part of the higher ed system that has seen upticks in enrollment, I think I would argue, unfortunately, are for-profit online institutions. But a big piece of that is that they have been good at doing digital marketing and getting the word out about their programs to individuals. And so what does it look like to have a, engaging with all of the partners in your city to really make people aware of what the true costs, which in many cases for the courses might be zero for someone, would be to come to the school, and thinking about creative ways of both getting that message out digitally, but also through community partners, so that more people are just aware of what financing they can get in accessing community college education.
Thank you, Rachel. If we want to keep on time and allow for 45 minutes for the breakout sessions, we need to break now. So thank you very much for your informative presentation. This is a first meeting of hopefully many in the future, so we will continue this conversation. I'd like to thank Bob for setting up the first question in the breakout session, which is I've been involved in community partnerships for a long time, particularly those with higher education, and he mentioned mutual interest. And so the first question in your breakout session will be about mutual interest. I happen to believe that altruism really doesn't exist. People always have some kind of self-interest. And so it's accepting that reality. And so I would like you all to think about in your breakout sessions, what will you and your organization get out of this partnership? So we'll be breaking people into groups. There should be a facilitator in each group, and everyone should have the questions.
I guess we're not going to breakouts.
Good. I lost my connection. Could you tell? Everything froze.
Yeah, you cut off at I
Oh,
forget at what point. I picked up for you.
good. Thank you. You can
No
you can
worries.
complete my sentences at this point.
Yeah, and that was the last question.
Good. I figured it was. I thought
sent in.
the last thing I heard myself say was, "Carl, I think we're ready to turn it back to you." Presumably, nobody else heard me say that. I'm guessing.
No, we didn't hear that line, but I think you got most of
Yeah. Good.
we caught most of it.
Good. This was fun. I hope we'll see. Certainly
Indeed.
From what the mayor said in that clip, and from what the president said, it looks to me as if they've got their heads screwed on right about this challenge and how to address it. So we'll see.
Indeed.
I guess we can cut off and go about.
I think we should probably drop. Yeah.
Get the rest of our day back. Good.
Sounds good.
Thanks for roping me into this and sharing.
No, thanks for doing it. It was fun.
Yeah, good. Okay, we'll go on the road
I'll leave them a chat message. Let them know.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Go on the road. Do a little road show.
Absolutely. The Rachel and Bob show.
We are going to chat with these McKinsey folks about the task force.
Oh, good. Good. See where
where that goes.
Yeah. Did Joe set that up with Pulsifer?
No, I actually chatted with Angie after our call.
Okay.
And she made the connection to them.
Oh, good.
So,
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whenever that report comes out, we can really go on a roadshow, I think.
Good. Okay.
Okay.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. You too. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Are you doing anything for Passover? You guys hosting?
Not really. Yeah, over the years, we typically had.
Okay, we're all coming back now. I'm trying to be respectful of people's times. I don't think we have time to report out on the first session, but definitely we will share all of this information with you. I trust you had a interesting and meaningful conversation, and also hopefully you've gotten to know some of your partners better, which is also one of the factors that make collaborations work well together, is the relationship you develop among your partners, mutual respect. And so hopefully we've taken a few steps forwards in that arena as well. So I'd like to thank you for your participation and collaboration in these breakout sessions. Dr. Harris, would you like to wrap up?
Yeah, powerful morning. We started on time. We'll end on time. That's the capital way. And but what we'll do is we'll thank you for that information and the data, right, in those sessions. So we had recorders in each. We'll compile that. We'll synthesize that. And what we're going to do is a few weeks or what have you from now, we'll send out something for part 2 where we'll review what we said we were willing to do in those sessions over the last 45 minutes. And then we'll get begin to develop a more concrete plan. Amazing work. Just wanted to thank you once again up front for what I'm hopeful that you'll continue to do in terms of supporting our community. I think that Hartford has a huge potential, and I think we started with that with the tale of the two cities. And I think everybody on the call today is willing to lock arms to ensure that the outcomes of our city is equitable, and certainly more equitable for all of its citizens. So just thank you once again. I think the spring is looking up, right? And it's due to things like this. And so once again, thanks everybody for coming out. We'll share the presentations with everybody. We'll send that out. We'll send out a short survey, and then we'll also send out a report on once we synthesize the feedback from the sessions this afternoon. But great, and everybody have a great Friday and weekend, and take care. I just took a picture of that waving, so if you see that on the social media.